Here's my first commentary on the Bible for all of you Patreon supporters. I really appreciate you being a part of this early venture for me in Patreon. It's been an interesting project to ask people to support the videos and commentaries and audio that I'm making. And you might know that your support goes a long way. It helps to produce my podcast, helps to produce some of the live feeds and streams that I do, and makes these commentaries possible. So I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Here's part of the reason I want to talk about the Bible is because the Bible plays this outsized role in American society, in my opinion. There is so much influence in how people think in this country that they believe is rooted in their understanding of the Bible. It happens in our law, it happens in how we interact with each other, it happens in the imagination that we have for how we're supposed to live in this world. Now, over the course of these Bible commentaries, I'm going to make the point a number of times that I'm not entirely convinced that people's perceptions about what they think comes from the Bible actually comes from the Bible. I think it often comes from their religious teaching that has used the Bible in particular ways, but nonetheless. It's for their mind and from their perspective. It really does come from their understanding of the Bible. So this is why I think it matters a lot about what's there. And at this particular time, it's the beginning of March 2018. Easter is on the horizon. And the Easter story is one of the biggest and most influential in all of the Christian narrative. Certainly Christmas has a much higher profile when it comes to larger culture. People pay attention to Christmas. But that Easter story, if it's told in a particular way, really influences how people think about the world, how they think about one another, and even how they think about justice and violence. And that's what I want to talk about today. The Easter story can be told, and a lot of people have heard it told this way, that it was the judgment of God coming down upon Jesus that caused Jesus' death, and that's the tool God utilized to bring about the forgiveness and the restoration of people into a relationship with God. So you may have heard this, that the cross is central to the entire story of Christianity, and that what we see in the cross is that God laid bare the wrath of God upon Jesus so that it wouldn't fall upon humanity, and then via Jesus, humanity can enter into a relationship with God. I don't think that's the story at all as the Bible presents it. I do think that's the story that a lot of Christians present. I do think that's the story of a lot of doctrines and teachings of Christianity. I just don't think you can get that out of the biblical narratives, especially the narratives of the gospel. And I would even say, even though I'm not going to talk much about it today, even the Apostle Paul's understanding of the death of Jesus was not to be understood in that way, even though so often people give credit to Paul for that view. But here's what I think matters in this story. It's really just the opposite of that. It's the opposite of the story that it was God's wrath that was coming down upon Jesus through the cross. I think we're supposed to read the story with the cross as central to the story of Jesus, because the cross was the means by which the government, and at the time of Jesus, the partnership of the religious system with the government, was that the cross was the tool used to bring about social order. It was used to bring about social power. It was used where the government would be able to inflict the ultimate punishment on a person, death, and that was a means of getting people into order, of control. So interestingly, what happens in the story is Jesus is declared innocent all through the Gospels. This is the really interesting thing about the reading of the Gospels, is that Jesus is seen as an innocent one. It happens in the Gospel of Luke really intensely. He's brought before Herod. Herod says, we think he's innocent. He's brought before Pilate. Pilate says, we think he's innocent. He's then, the crowd is then ginned up to call for his crucifixion. And then during the crucifixion, one of the people crucified next to him, one who had been found guilty, even says, don't you know that this one is innocent? On 3 different occasions, Pontius Pilate says, I find him to be innocent. Then the person on the cross finds him innocent. The whole narrative of this is that Jesus is the innocent one. Now, the only way you could read that story the way that a lot of religious commentators who want it to be about the wrath of God coming down on Jesus is that everyone finds Jesus innocent in this story except the crowd and God. But that's not the story. The story is that the people have been confused into believing that this power and tool of death could be used as their means of salvation. You see it in the narratives in the gospel that the people of the religious community were afraid that Jesus was going to cause an uprising, and that would cause an ending of their civilization, ending of their society, ending of their way of life. So Jesus then is sacrificed as a means to preserve culture and society. You can see this happening in so many of our narratives that happen in crime and punishment in this country. Capital punishment being the closest ally to this story, but also the way we imprison people, the way we take away people's rights, the way we exclude people, the way we lack power for some people that we think don't behave the way we want to, whether that's in the criminal justice system or hiring practices or credit scores, that we want to punish some people for behavior we don't think is right and to remove them from the rest of society so that we can protect that which is ours. And it's that very narrative that the biblical story wants to critique and say there's another way. Jesus ends up on the side of the people who feel they've been put out, pushed down, pushed aside, and where the power has been used to destroy them. So this is the story that you see in the Gospels. It's a critique that the power of the cross is impotent to actually bring about the kind of salvation, security, goodness, community cohesion that the people are longing for. That's why I think we should understand Jesus is saying, Father, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing, in a much broader sense than simply they don't understand that there's some cosmic story of judgment being played out here. Just the opposite. What they don't understand is that the human story of conflict is not going to be solved in these ways. And this becomes then the story of the biblical narrative. That's why I'm a person who's highly committed to the Christian story of the cross, but it's not the cross as to where God gets God's salvation. That's the resurrection narrative. That is, even in the midst of that, God's going to be there and present and not let the Holy One see decay in the grave. This is the story that we're supposed to tell from the perspective of God. God's constant presence with the one who has been abused, with the one who is being put down, with the one who is being executed, and God being on the side of that one, not God being on the side of the ones who are using power and death and rage and violence to bring about some kind of justice. That's the Easter story. So we should tell the Easter story. We should even talk to our kids about it, but not in the sense that God is after you, just the opposite. When you feel like people are after you and life is unjust and life is unfair, you know that God is even on your side at those times. So, commentary on the Bible, and in this case, and for the next couple of weeks, some commentary on Easter. All right. Thanks for being a supporter.